ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. You're watching your Top Think Tanks review, and I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today on the show, we're going to go over 5 of your top 50 United States think tanks, and we're going to look at the top stories from each one of their websites. To begin the show, the Brookings Institution explains the gap between black and white student debt. Next, the American Enterprise Institute explains how China's economy is stalling. Then, the Pew Research Center shows that immigrants in the Middle East have more than doubled over the last decade. Then, Human Rights Watch will call out Azerbaijan's relentless crackdown on critics. And then we'll end the show with the United States Institute of Peace, as they look at Nigeria's problems beyond Boko Haram. Now, to begin, the Brookings Institution explains that the debt gap between black and white students is only going to increase. The moment they earn their bachelor's degrees, black college graduates owe more than $7,400 on average than their white peers. But over the next few years, the black-white debt gap more than triples to a whopping $25,000. Differences in interest accrual and graduate school borrowing lead to black graduates holding nearly $53,000 in student loan debt 4 years after graduation, almost twice as much as their white counterparts. Now, racial disparities in student debt are larger than previously understood and have grown dramatically in recent decades. 4 years after earning a bachelor's degree, black graduates in the 2008 cohort held an average of $24,720 more student loan debt than white graduates. In the 1993 cohort, the difference was less than $2,000. So ladies and gentlemen, let's just break it down really quick. In 15 years, from 93 to 2008, the gap went from just under $2,000 to just under $25,000. Now, what are the consequences of these large disparities in debt? Default rates among borrowers have actually fallen sharply among all races, likely due to changes throughout the 1990s, which increased the penalties for institutions with high default rates and made it harder for students to avoid making repayments even after entering default. Now still, black borrowers remain more than 3 times as likely to default within 4 years as white borrowers. Hispanic borrowers, despite having about the same level of debt as white graduates, are more than twice as likely to default. And this is just the first findings of their entire report. I encourage you to check out the full results and their full report on the Brookings Institution website. Now, in a previous segment, the Pew Research Center surveyed the Chinese public, and about half of the respondents claimed their country's economy was growing, doing great, and the top in the world. The American Enterprise Institute says that China's economy is actually stalling. The most likely economic scenario over the course of the next decade is not high growth or an economic collapse, but stagnation. If this occurs, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, will have difficulty sustaining its ambitious national development and strategic plans. In particular, Beijing will not be able to avoid a more serious guns versus butter trade-off. There are 3 views of China's economic trajectory. 1, it is slowing, but also transforming into a healthier and very large economy. 2, it is stagnating. Or 3, a true economic crisis is inevitable in the not-too-distant future. Now, the preponderance of evidence is for stagnation. Both the China rising and crash scenarios are fundamentally flawed. While their ranks thin and their vision of success is watered down every year, there are still bulls who see China as a future economic success story. This view is based not on current analysis, but on a combination of history and the ensuing faith that pro-market reform will either be chosen by the Communist Party or be forced upon it. Now, reform forced on the party by some sort of crisis may indeed be the best hope, since the party voluntarily choosing pro-market reform at this point is highly unlikely. The much-hyped 2013 third plenary session did not in fact offer a sound set of reform proposals. For example, it promoted cooperation between the public and private sectors when the exact opposite is needed. Unsurprisingly, no net progress toward the market has been made since. Now, the economic and financial crash argument has a more specific problem. It mistakenly treats the troubled Chinese financial system as similar to the American system. Commercial financial systems in rich countries may be only as strong as their weakest link, but Chinese finance is dominated by the state. Its primary function is to serve state interests, not to make money. Non-commercial financial systems are only as weak as their strongest link, because governments can, without legal or political delay, order the strongest institutions to save the weakest. The cost, of course, is an enormous amount of waste. So, as China continues to expand its military, continues to expand its infrastructure, we'll see what happens to the economy, because it cannot be at this stagnant, this stalemate forever. It's either got to rise or it's got to fall. Now next, the Pew Research Center says the number of migrants in the Middle East has more than doubled from 25 million to 54 million between 2005 and 2015. Some of this growth was due to individuals and families seeking economic opportunities, but the majority of the migration surge, especially after 2011, was a consequence of armed conflict and the forced displacement of millions of people from their homes, many of whom who have left their countries of birth. Now, the rapid rise in the number of people looking for safe havens and new livelihoods has over the past decade transformed the Middle East into the world region with the fastest growing international migrant and forcibly displaced population, according to a Pew Research analysis of data from the United Nations agencies. All told, the Middle East migrant population increased by about 120% between 2005 and 2015. This far exceeds increases in the combined international migrant and forcibly displaced populations over the same period in continental Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean and the Asian Pacific region. Now, Europe's and North America's migrant populations also grew, but more slowly over the 2005 to 2015 period, about 20% in each region, even though Europe received a record 1.3 million asylum seekers in 2015, many from the Middle East. Now, within the Middle East, the migrant share of the region's population grew from 7% in 2005 to approximately 13% in 2015. Put another way, about 1 in 10 people living in the Middle East today are international migrants or were forcibly displaced. Now, this growth in the Middle East migrant population is largely the result of two factors: conflict and economic opportunity. Armed conflict in areas such as Syria, Iraq, and Yemen has displaced millions of people since 2005. This increase in the number of displaced people, including those displaced within their own birth countries, accounts for the majority, 60%, of the growth in the Middle East migrant population between 2005 and 2015. Second, economic opportunity, much of it concentrated in oil-rich Persian Gulf countries, has attracted millions of non-displaced international migrants seeking jobs, mostly from countries outside the Middle East. Some 40% of the growth in the Middle East migrant population between 2005 and 2015 can be explained by such economically motivated migration. Now, moving on next to Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch filed in a report that the Azerbaijani government renewed its vicious crackdown on critics and independent groups. The European Union and international financial institutions have a rare opportunity to insist on human rights reforms, as Azerbaijan actively seeks financial and other partnerships to offset a recent economic downturn. The 75-page report, Harassed, Imprisoned, Exiled: Azerbaijan's Continuing Crackdown on Government Critics, Lawyers, and Civil Society, documents the government's concerted efforts to undermine civil society. Human Rights Watch found that in 2016, the authorities used false, politically motivated criminal and administrative charges to prosecute political activists, journalists, and others. The government has built a restrictive legal and policy framework to paralyze the work of independent groups. Lawyers willing to defend critics have faced retaliation and disbarment. Although the authorities released several human rights defenders and others in early 2016, many others remain in prison or fled into exile. With the release of some wrongfully imprisoned activists earlier this year, there were high hopes that Azerbaijan was turning a corner, said South Caucasus director at Human Rights Watch and author of this report. But optimism is fading fast as the government relentlessly pursues critics and tries to shut down independent groups. Now, to end the show, the United States Institute of Peace looks at the problems in Nigeria besides Boko Haram. They include a growing humanitarian crisis because of destruction and displacement, including the risk of widespread hunger and the need for progress on reconstruction and reconciling communities. Throughout Nigeria, the flagging economy is further straining businesses, government spending, and day-to-day living. In 2014, Boko Haram ranked as the world's deadliest extremist group, killing thousands of people and outpacing the self-styled Islamic State or ISIS. The insurgency threatens not only Nigeria, but neighboring countries across the Lake Chad Basin. Resolving the crisis requires more than a security response. Nigerian leaders and society must address a range of factors: economic, social, environmental, and political, that create conditions for Boko Haram and other violent conflict to take root. Governors from the north, where approximately half the country's 180 million people live, will be attending a 3-day symposium in Washington, D.C. to discuss opportunities for constructive and inclusive action to address the challenges in their region. Conversations will include Nigerian civil society and U.S. policy leaders. Now, the webcast will focus on Nigeria's prospects for peace, what Nigerian citizens and leaders can do to manage tensions or violence, the most important issues for the state governors, and how stability in northern Nigeria can contribute to progress and prosperity for the country. Now, you can get involved with this 3-day symposium in DC by being interactive by posting your questions and comments before and during the discussion on Facebook, on Twitter using the hashtag AskNGGovs, or by emailing africa@usip.org. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for today's show. I want to thank you for watching your Top Think Tanks review. You can find the link to all of these articles below in the description. Please, I encourage you to check out the full reports of each one of these stories. I encourage you to get involved with the symposium that we talked about here at the end with peace ideas for Nigeria. But anyways, while you're looking at those, subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter. But thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This does it for your Top Think Tanks review, and I was your host, Bryce Dolan.